So when we look at integral human design, really we look at a way of mapping consciousness and form together. We're using this body graph. This is an old image, but it always is the same structure. We're using this body graph within the context of the wheel of the 64 gene keys, as Richard has said, which are the 64 archetypal prime elements of consciousness, the foundational codes. This is a general matrix, and when we personalize this matrix, then we take out some of these gene keys, the ones that make up the individuality of the person, and we have a personalized body graph. That's the two-dimensional imprint, and it's a very precise way of showing it. But the main thing to keep in mind when we talk about the imprint is that it's always something that invites you to grow and to go further. It's always something that's there to be taken as a starting point, from where, with each and every gene key, with each and every channel and stream that's drawn in here, to go further, to lift up, to raise up to the highest potential. And to give you a little taste of that, we have created like an overall master image where we can structure what we want to share with you today. And it's these 4 quadrants. It's the 4 quadrants of apprehension. Each and every one of us has an individual aspect and a collective aspect. We're both individual and part of the collective all the time, and we have an external and an internal aspect to us. We have an objective world, seemingly, and a subjective experience. That's the who and the what and the why and the how in a way. It's in the upper left that we apprehend the world individually, internally, through our own consciousness. We have an inner experience of whatever is going on right now. And on the upper right, it's the brain and the organism and all the objective part of being individual. On the lower left, we're always in the collective, internally connected to the collective through our culture and values and worldview. And on the lower right, we're living in collective, externally, in systems, in a certain environment that we perceive as outside of us. And in integral human design, we want to use this big map, all these 4 quadrants of apprehension, because we look at a human being from all these different angles to give justification to the fullness of our true presence and radiance that always comprises all of these elements and much more. And we want to support our growth into more and more of that fullness. In that sense, these quadrants form the background for what we take you through now. And we look at the matrix of these 64 gene keys from the fullness of these 4 quadrants of apprehension and all these possibilities of development that we have in there. And we do this to provide easier access to the essence that's symbolized with this beautiful blue dot in the middle of the drawing. And we'll take you through elements of integral human design now. The outer layer of the outer circle here symbolizes more the integral, the middle symbolizes more the human, the inner symbolizes more the design, the code, and the map of the human design. And we've come up with like 12 key words to structure what we want to share. So the outer layer, the integral approach, provides this holographic, multidimensional, all-embracing, transcendent view of humanity and development. And it's there to be empowering to human beings and educate them and invite them to be incandescent. And it uses, and that's the most inner circle, it uses this description of how a human being is structured energetically, uses this body graph to give practical and precise and accessible and simple descriptions of how you are and how you can develop. So, we'll take you into the first of these quadrants, which is the upper right. And as I said, the upper right quadrant is more the behavioral, objective side of reality, seen from the individual view. It's the visible biological features, it's the brain and the organism. It's where we locate science and what we consider to be true, what is observable. And here we want to show you what human design is and where it comes from and how it actually works. And I'm handing it over to Richard to say a little bit on the holographic principle.
Said so beautifully, to see a world in a grain of sand and a heaven in a wild flower. Hold infinity in the palm of your hand, and eternity in an hour. That little piece of poetry says a lot. And it says really it captures the essence of the holographic view that science now is increasingly discovering wherever it's beginning to train its lens. It has also intuited and known for a long, long, long time. And what we've been seeing for so long is that life seems to reflect itself everywhere you look, so that we see patterns within patterns, and that's where we get this famous axiom, as above, so below, because everything is holographically mirroring itself in everything else. And in the Bible you have this, God made man in his image. And so where you can see it in your palm, whether it's in the tea leaves or in the stars or in the different tiny parts of your foot or your eye, all the poets, the mystics and the scientists, have all seen the same thing. So here you can see, pulsing here the helical nebula in the heavens that one of the powerful telescopes has picked up, and you can see how it's twisted into the similar shape as DNA. So it's a really wonderful image of how the as above, so below, right down to the tiniest things. These same patterns are found recurring everywhere and everywhere. So it's really about finding the whole in the parts, and particularly through black hole theory. In science, you see that there's this concept of the holographic nature of reality being found increasingly. And it gets really interesting, because when you apply it to time, like Blake has done, eternity in an hour, because every moment actually in time unfolds a story. So on the boundary of a black hole, of its event horizon, is encoded all the information that's inside it. Which means that time itself is also a part of this holographic reality. And this is where we get the idea of having a birth chart, and it's where the tradition of astrology comes from in the first place. That every moment that contains information about what's to come, what's born out of that moment. So your conception and your birth contain the blueprints of the cycles that will be lived out, in your life, because everything is geometrically perfect, and every event is linked to every other event in time and space. And this is the ancient notion of the wheel, is how we have tracked the stars and the seasons and the cycles of life forever. So here you can see the Chinese wheel of life with the 64 hexagrams laid out, and these are symbols that were used to really unlock some of the seasonal patterns and cycles within our lives. So looking at the zodiac allows us to see our imprinting in front of the backdrop of the heavens. So what you do is you put in your data, the codes that were active at the time of your birth, and your position in the space-time continuum. And in that moment, like a photographic negative, the event horizon of that moment, everything is encoded, everything that's going to come about your life. And that's where we get this idea of the body graph in the center here, because we transfer the codes of the cosmos into the biochemical map of the body, of your chemistry. And what this does is it shows patterns within us, physical patterns, emotional patterns, mental patterns, and it shows us our individual imprinting, which really leads us to our story, because when you can translate that into language, what you get is you get your story, you get your mythology, why you're here, what is your life designed to approximate, what's it going to look like, what's the story of your life. And that's what integral human design is all about.
Thank you. And it's really, like Richard said, it's really a biological code. We're talking about the code of life here, actually. We're using the same code that is in our genes. In our genes, we have 4 letters that make up this twisted, very, very long DNA string in each of our cells. And it's 1.5 meters of DNA with 3 billion base pairs in every cell, and we have 50 billion cells, I think, in our body. So it's a lot of coding we have, and it's all made out of a sequence of 4 letters that are combined 2 by 2 and just form a sequence. There are 4 nucleobases that basically that are grouped into groups of 3 that we then call a codon, or an amino acid group, and there are exactly 64 codons in the human DNA that are the basis of protein synthesis, and in this respect the basis of life, how life works. And they're lined up in a sequence in each of the cells. So if we use the coding that's in there, if we draw it all on one page, we have these 64 possibilities, 64 codons made out of the 4 basic letters. And in integral human design, we're using exactly the same code, which is the code of the 64 gene keys. The letters are called a little different here, maybe yin and yang, but the main point is that we're talking about the code of life that is the same in every cell and in the cosmos, and has been discovered 5,000 years ago in the Chinese Wheel of the I Ching. If we look into the cell today, if we use what the Human Genome Project has found, we see that it's really a barcode. This image that looks like a carpet, it's the barcode when it's photographed under the microscope. That's how the coding is actually sequenced in each of our cells. Now, the important thing with that is that we have a lot of coding. We're really very coded with these 64 codons, and all of our proteins really are read from the nucleus, from the DNA, technically speaking. So in the old paradigm, the biologists were talking about the primacy of the DNA. All our behavior, all of our actions and movement were based on proteins that basically were determined by the DNA code in the nucleus. And people at the time thought that the nucleus was the brain of the cell. But then they found out, and that's basically the work of Bruce Lipton, that in the new paradigm we have to accept that perception actually controls the biology in terms of what comes from outside. The primary signal that we perceive through a kind of chemical switch then creates a signal that tells the DNA to synthesize proteins and then produce behavior and action, movement and life. Yeah? So in this sense, how we perceive the world really controls what comes out of the DNA, and then translated what frequency the 64 gene keys take in each of our cells. This is embodiment. This is the biological basis of embodiment. We are responsible for how we deal with our perception.
And then we're into the empowering aspect of the quadrant now. So that's what you're talking about.
Thank you for mentioning that. We're on the... Say something more, Richard.
Well, that as these slides show, that it's incredibly, this shift from the old paradigm to the new paradigm is the shift from being disempowered to being empowered, because in the old model we didn't have any choice. We couldn't do anything about it. It's just the selfish gene was running the show, and that was what our scientists had us believe for a while, if we took that bait. And it's not the truth at all. It's not. There may be some elements of truth in it, but what's now being discovered through the field of epigenetics is the opposite, rather, as Werner's just shown so beautifully, which means that the power is back in our hands, and that's what Integral Human Design is founded on. As we said, you are the architect of your own evolution, because as you see, it's all about your attitude. That's what's really influencing and affecting your DNA. So please go on, Werner, because I'm enjoying your presentation bit here.
Thank you. Yeah. We are empowered because we have a heart. I'm just mentioning here one experiment that has been taken in 1994 already about the effect of our heart frequencies on the DNA, where people have found that the DNA actually contracts when we are in a negative attitude, or when we have negative intentions, and negative in terms of emotions like fear, anger, jealousy, and frustration. It has a measurable effect on the DNA. It contracts. And on the other side, when there are people standing around, how do you say this in science, where when you put a piece of DNA on, and observe it and measure its length, when people who are standing around open their heart and have a positive attitude and intention and emotion like gratefulness and love and appreciation and compassion, the DNA actually relaxes and opens, which means all the code, all the gifts that are coded in there are more accessible. And it all depends on the heart. The heart is a very strong electromagnetic source in the organism, actually the strongest source of all. It's 2.5 watts, I think. That it's real strong energy. And the heart frequency transmits the consciousness we're in, the attitude, the intention, our focus, our beliefs, our level of consciousness. Actually, through the perception, through how we experience the world, through how we choose to perceive the world, actually determines the meanings of the letters, the meanings of the genetic letters. The gene expression is totally in our hands, because we're the ones who create or discreate beliefs, and who we choose where we focus on. We are responsible for our intentions. And that's why what we convey with Integral Human Design is an empowering message. That's how we can become the prime architects of our own evolution.
Thank you, Werner. I mean, I'd like to just reiterate how amazing and empowering that information is for all of us, and that it's going to go on revolutionizing our entire view of reality as we discover more about these epigenetic mechanisms and how we are translating life, and therefore we are encoding ourselves with the frequencies that we will then manifest through our biology. So it's really, that little journey that Werner just shared with us, it's an amazing, empowering thing. And this new biology it's really something that not that many people are yet that aware of, and it's only just being introduced into schools. So it's quite something. And just to know that your DNA right now inside your body, even as you're hearing these words, is listening and it's responding to your attitude. So it's contracting or expanding according to your responses and your conditioning. And that's really the central premise of the entire gene key synthesis and all these teachings, is that we get to have a play. We get to be the one that influences what our life is really going to look like and what our story, how it unfolds, and what's hidden inside us. What's hidden inside that cocoon of our DNA, what's going to emerge. And that really brings us to the practical side, to the practical aspect of this quadrant, which is where it comes down to looking at the body graph itself. And because what the body graph does is it allows us to take that journey we've just been on, the holographic and the empowering, and then to integrate that into the field of the self. And that's what supports us to differentiate our higher potential from the conditioning that we've received, our conditioned self. And in human design, what that leads us to is it leads us to this notion of the types, 5 basic types. And that's one of the first things you come across when you look into the human design, the integral human design system, is that there are these 4 or 5 basic energy signatures that emerge. And there's a lot of information about them in the human design world. And they can either be presented in an empowering way, and sometimes they can be presented in a disempowering way. The other thing to say from this is that the 64 gene keys are arranged in these 3 levels, these 3 frequency bands. So when you input the raw data and you see your imprinting, that's fixed, the imprinting. But how you activate that imprinting is up to you. So we look at the body graph at these 3 levels through the gene keys. The shadow, which is really your low frequency conditioned self, the self that's rooted in fear. And the potential, which is relating to the gift frequency in the gene keys language, which is when you begin to unlock the creative power and expand your DNA. And finally, the essence, or in other words, the siddhi, it's called in the gene keys, which means the higher code, which is really what's hidden in your DNA, what's the core, most divine expression or archetype. So really, it's the archetype that's fixed, but not the expression of the archetype. And that's what the gene keys are, they're archetypes. So it's up to us whether we contract or expand that DNA inside us. So each time we look at a body graph through integral human design, we're really seeing 3 body graphs. We're seeing a hologram. And our attitude is what determines the nature of our hologram. So,
yeah.
Do you want to say something?
Yeah, just briefly, it's like we have these reliable anchor points and anchor processes that are described, and we show them in a spectrum, both in the gene keys and in these 3 body graphs. And you can see it as a spectrum of potential of development from here to there, but of course you can have much more steps in between. It's just how we try to keep it simple. That's the one thing I want to throw in, and the other thing is, in each of the personalized body graphs, you have the type of person you are. And now we're going to generalize this even more. There's millions and millions of types. Every person is totally unique and needs to be seen and loved and accepted exactly the way they are. And as a first approach, we can generalize the type of person you are into 5 different types, meta types. So back to you.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, because they are very broad, and really that's why we refer to them in Integral Human Design as life codes. They're 5 practical life codes. Rather than seeing yourself as a type, it's more helpful perhaps to see yourself as having a code that if you follow that code, it creates an optimum life. And if you move against the grain of that code, it will create interference in your life. And this is really the most practical aspect, one of the most practical aspects of Integral Human Design, these codes. And it's very easy to find out your type and your code because it stays the same for your whole journey. So we have the manifestors, and a manifestor is the only one that has a proactive life code. And I'll touch on a little of each of these, but the proactive one is really about acting, but it depends on how you act, from what level of frequency you act. If you act from a low frequency, then what you're going to do as a manifestor is you're going to meet huge resistance. If you act from a high frequency, out of love rather than fear, you can end up manifesting anything. Whereas if you act from a low frequency, you manifest chaos. So the proactive life code is about obviously going out there and doing something and making it yourself, making your own journey as you move along. And yet you need to really see, is it coming from a place of love, your proactivity, or is it coming from a place of alarm, stress, or unconscious fear? That's the key. And when you look at the generator types, there's 2 types, the manifesting generator and the pure generator. And the majority of humans are falling into these life codes, the responsive life codes. And so really we as humanity, most of us live in this response field where it's not, we are conditioned perhaps to behave or think that we're proactive. Right, and whenever a generator or a manifesting generator tries to make something happen and tries to be proactive, it can lead to all kinds of difficulties. And so this code is really about letting life lead you. It's essentially about relaxing. And the action that emerges from response can either be intense in the manifesting generator, or it's fluid and dynamic, and fluid and rhythmic in the generator. So there are different qualities to the lives depending on if you're a manifesting generator or a generator. See, the manifesting generator is going to be more of a sustained burst of energy. They have this intensity of energy available, and the pure generator has a different. It's more about flow. And they both get there at the same time, it's just different rhythms. So again, the high frequency or the low frequency is what really creates the fluidity and the harmony in the generator type. And when you come to the projector has the interactive life code. And the key word if you're a projector is really recognition. And what you're having to recognize is a high frequency or a low frequency. So you have to attune to that, and you have to know what it feels like to be recognized. Because you can be recognized at a relatively low frequency, and that can feel good for you. It can feel okay, but it probably has some codependence attached to it. Whereas if someone recognizes you at your highest frequency that's inside you, then it's a completely different kind of relationship. It has more of a flavor of devotion to it in a way. So that recognition is your key word as a projector. All life's opportunities will flow through the recognition of your higher potential. And that's a very empowering and practical thing for you to know about. And then finally the reflector. The reflector has the digestive life code. And it's digestive because really life is pouring through you all the time. And if you're a reflector, nothing has to stick to you. So your code is really about finding the right environment. So you have to literally take it in. You have to digest the community around you, the countryside around you, the people, your house, the bricks, the everything. And what's up to you is, will you reflect a high frequency or a low frequency? And that's the key. Because if life isn't working for you, it's because you're probably in the wrong place, or you're a victim of your own shadows, and therefore you're only reflecting those shadows around you in the people around you, and you're actually enhancing them. So this integral view of looking at these types is quite empowering and very practical, because it's all based on, it's up to you to, in a sense, at the deepest sense, we all have the elements of the reflector. It's up to our DNA what we reflect into our environment, what we reflect back through our relationships, for example. So there was a little taste of the types.
Thank you, Richard. That was beautiful.
My pleasure.